Welcome to Sola Church Online.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers. Together, we are planting a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California this fall, 2021. While California was closed, we launched online. So this is it. You're here, Sola Church Online. If you're watching on the Church Online platform, you can click invite in the chat feed to ask someone to join you.
And if you're watching on Facebook, you can share this to your timeline.
If you watch on YouTube, be sure to click subscribe so that you catch all the Sola Church content.
And today is a very special Sunday, and I want to be the first to wish you Happy Father's Day.
Thank you. It's kind of been Father's Week for me. Last weekend I was in Austin, and I got to see my eldest daughter Lauren and our granddaughter Ever. I hadn't seen them in quite some time because we were due for a visit when COVID started, and of course that cost us another year. So it was so great to spend time with them, and of course I'm home just in time to celebrate with you and with Odessa. So I'm a very happy dad today.
And a very exceptional dad at
Thank
that.
you.
And I also want to wish my own dad Happy Father's Day. Love you, Dad. And to all the dads watching out there, we appreciate you. You are so important in our lives, and we hope you have a fabulous day today. And with that, let's worship.
Blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where your streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place. Though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name. And every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name when the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name on the road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Give and take away. Give and take away. Heart will is defeated. The King is alive. I raise a hallelujah with everything inside of me. I raise a hallelujah. I will watch the darkness leave. I raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. I raise a hallelujah. Fear you lost your hold on me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive. Sing a little louder, 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 sing a little louder in the presence of my enemies. Sing a little louder, louder than the unbelief. Sing a little louder, my weapon is a melody. Sing a little louder, heaven comes to fight for me. Sing a little louder, in the presence of my enemies. Sing a little louder, louder than the unbelief. Sing a little louder, my weapon is a melody. Sing a little louder, heaven comes to fight for me. Sing a little louder, I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar. And up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm, louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive. Praise the hallelujah. I raise a hallelujah. I raise a hallelujah.
So this is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're our guest today, just checking us out, please don't feel obligated to give. But for those that have made Sola Church their church home, this is a meaningful part of the service. You'll see a link in the chat feed. It will open a separate window so you won't miss anything. You can always go to our website, right? People can go to solachurch.life and click give. There you can make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even schedule a recurring gift. Some prefer PayPal. The email address for that is give@solachurch.life. As always, we want to thank you guys and remind you that your giving is making it possible not only for us to do church online each week, but it's getting us one step closer to being able to buy all the things we need to do portable church when we launch in person in the fall. So every donation matters. Thank you guys so much.
Speaking of in person, California, including Los Angeles County, opened up this week.
Yeah, finally.
And can you tell us, is there any update on our first in-person startup party?
Well, just, for those that may not even know like what a startup party is, we've been doing these Sola Church startup parties, these hour-long events where we get to meet people who are interested in Sola Church, where we get to present our vision for launching a life-giving church in Santa Monica, and where people have the opportunity to respond, indicating their interest level going forward. So we did several of these events online, when there were the restrictions, and many of you joined the launch team following one of those online events. It was awesome. But once we knew that California was going to reopen, we decided it was time to pivot from online startup parties to in-person startup parties. Now, here's the thing, just to sort of share our life with you guys a little bit. We moved from Murrieta, where we rode out the pandemic, to Santa Monica just 2 weeks ago. And everyone knows that when you move, there's a point a week or two before the move where everything in your life just sort of gets swallowed up by the move. The move just takes over everything. So, again, those couple weeks leading up to the move, which was a couple weeks ago, days later, I traveled to Austin, as I mentioned earlier in the service. Just got back a couple of days ago. So basically, it's just been very difficult to make progress on those other things during the last month. So that's just keeping it real. That's just sharing with you guys. But you know what? We're back at work. We're hard at work. In addition to us, we've got a couple other people who are actively scouting venues, and we're hopeful that we're going to nail down that place and that date and that time, and we're going to have news for everybody soon.
Yes, it has really been a challenge.
Yeah.
But if you want to pre-register for a startup party, you can go to solachurch.life and click Startup Party, and you will be the first to get an update on the date, the time, the location of the startup party. So make sure you go and do that, pre-register for the startup party.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll go do that and we'll see you there.
Yeah.
So let's get into our time of teaching.
Well, let's turn once again in our Bibles to Judges, this time chapter 13. We're in the middle of this message series called Heroes. We've been looking at highlights in this Old Testament book called Judges, where we've been inspired by the stories of women and men called judges who did heroic things with their lives. And so we've been talking about how it's not just about their story, but it's about your story. Heroes is the series that asks the question, what's your story? In other words, what does it look like for you to live heroically in this moment? And so as we pick it up in chapter 13 and in verse 1, it says, again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. So, one of the things that we've observed is that there's this recurring cycle in Judges where the people sinned and suffered, and then they cried out and they were delivered. And so in verse 1, it says, again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. This is the sixth and last cycle, at least sixth cycle as it relates to the major judges. Some count a seventh cycle that includes some of the minor judges. We're not focusing on those in this series. So whereas in the past they were dealing with oppression from sand people, now they're dealing with oppression from sea people. The Philistines had actually come originally from the area around the Aegean Sea. They had tried and failed to conquer Egypt, only to settle on the fertile coastal plain of Canaan. So they had advanced iron technology, and this gave them a decided military advantage. You'll notice the reference, the timestamp to 40 years. This is the longest oppression recorded in the book of Judges. So there's something different, though, about this cycle. And it's not so much what the text says as what the text
doesn't say. It doesn't say that they cried out or that they were ever fully or finally delivered. You know, it's almost as if they had come to accept the status quo. In the past, after so many years of oppression, they would cry out. In this case, the oppression goes on and on and on, and there's no cry from them. And it makes me think about how we often come to accept the status quo. I mean, even when we know that our lives are out of alignment, you know, it could be that there was a time in your life where if you got out of alignment with God, like you made an adjustment right away, and now maybe you can get out of alignment with God and let it go for weeks or for months or even for years before doing anything about it. May I urge you not to accept the status quo in your life. Don't settle for anything less than God has for you. Notice in verse 2, now there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. So meet Manoah in verse 2. He was from the Dan tribe. The tribe of Dan was actually located originally right next to what was at this time Philistia, in the southwestern part of the country. But because of their inability to defeat the Philistines, the tribe had actually migrated north. In fact, they went so far north that you couldn't go any farther north and still be in Israel. You know, later in the book of Judges, we hear this phrase that we then find over and over again in the Bible. In Judges 20, verse 1, there's this phrase from Dan to Beersheba. And the idea is from the northernmost point in the country to the southernmost point in the country. That's how far Dan had gone. So anytime you read from Dan to Beersheba, it's almost an idiom, like our idiom top to bottom. If you say that you cleaned from top to bottom, you know, it means to have cleaned thoroughly. Well, in this case, you know, top to bottom of the country geographically. So they had gone as far as they could possibly go from their battle with the Philistines. You could say that they had run from their problems. Oftentimes that's what we do. Oftentimes we run from our problems rather than actually dealing with them. It's tempting, right? And to be honest, there are times that we should flee, but don't. That's not good. But there are many other times when we shouldn't flee, but we do. You know, if there's some difficult thing in your life that God's called you to face, that God's called you to deal with, that God's called you to work through or to overcome, are you absent? Are you AWOL? I want to suggest to you that sometimes these are the defining moments of our lives. It could be that when we get farther along in our life and we look back, that we will see 2 or 3 times that we should have stayed and fought for something, but instead we ran, that we'll regret. So maybe for you, this is a time to stay the course. Well, a little bit more about Manoah. Zorah, this town Zorah, was actually near Philistia. So what this tells us is that while the tribe had moved north, there were a handful of Danites who'd actually stayed. And so, this man Manoah was one of those. That meant, of course, that the Philistines were an ongoing problem for him, but the Philistines were not his only problem. You notice in verse 2 that his unnamed wife was barren. I read that and I think about the 6 million plus women in the United States dealing with infertility. And if that's you or someone that you love, I'm so sorry. I know from having walked through that season with family members and friends what a painful and difficult time that can be. I understand too that this isn't necessarily going to be comforting when I say this, but you are in good company. In the Bible, there were so many amazing women who dealt with this. In the Old Testament, I think of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah. In the New Testament, Elizabeth. But of course, here in our story, of course, Manoah's wife. So one of the things that's especially upsetting about this, and we've seen this with regard to other things in the book of Judges, in ancient times, Some people would have interpreted this as divine disfavor. So you not only had the heartbreak of wanting children but being unable to have them, but you would be dealing with the stigma that would come along with that, and people thinking that you were somehow less than, or even treating you, like you were part of some outgroup. So notice in verse 3, it says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, 'Indeed now, you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son.'" So we are reintroduced to the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon in chapter 6. We talked a lot about the angel of the Lord then. I won't rehearse all of the things I said on that occasion. I'll just remind you that this is called a theophany. This is actually the pre-incarnate Christ, Jesus, before he was born in Bethlehem. And so in the book of Judges, we find more references to the angel of the Lord than in any other book. That's kind of an interesting feature. But I love it in verse 3, this elliptical phrase, "You are, but you shall." I might even add the verb be. You are, but you shall be. You know that God sees our potential. When God looks at us, he sees what our lives could be. You know that, given enough time, Manoah's wife had probably, begun at least to try to accept that she may never have children. So whereas she may have dreamed of being a mother and may have for many years thought of herself as being a future mother, it's possible that she had stopped thinking of herself as a future mother. And I just can't help but think about those of you that are joining us online this morning who have had, these hopes and dreams and wondering whether there's something that you've given up on, whether there's something that you've long since stopped thinking about. There are a lot of us who are living with limitations. And unlike Manoah's wife, who had no control at all over this particular limitation in her life, for us, many of our limitations are self-imposed. And how we want to break free from those, we really, really do. I mean, somebody said, and I agree, that if you could see yourself in terms of your true potential, you wouldn't recognize yourself. I mean, Manoah's wife must have been like, "Who, me?" And the angel of the Lord, "Why not you?" And maybe today you're listening now and you're like, "Who, me?" And God would be like, "Why not you? You are, but you shall be." You are, but you shall be. You keep telling yourself what you are, and others keep telling you what you are. The evil one keeps telling you what you are, but God is trying to tell you what you shall be. We serve a shall be God. Do you have any shall be family members or friends? People who remind you that while you are this, you are going to be that? If you do, man, you should be thankful. And if not, get new friends. But before you do, ask yourself, am I a shall be family member or friend? Do I remind the people around me that though they are this, they will be that? So let's pick it up then in verses 4 and 5. It says, "Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head. For the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines." So what is a Nazarite? Verse 5. The Hebrew noun Nazarite comes from a root that means to separate. So the Nazarite vow was made by someone vowing to separate him or herself to God. Usually this vow lasted for 30, 60, and sometimes 90 days. But occasionally people took this vow for life. In the Bible, we think of Samson, who we're talking about today. We think also of Samuel. And in the New Testament, we think of John the Baptist. Now, for background, I'm not going to have you turn there now, and I'm not even going to talk about it exhaustively, but you could later go back and read Numbers chapter 6. That's where the law of the Nazarite is introduced. And basically, the Nazarite vow included three things. One, no wine, but it wasn't just about alcohol, because it meant no grape juice, it meant no grapes, it meant no raisins, like nothing that grew on the vine. Number 2, no haircuts. They couldn't cut their hair for the length of the vow, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or again, in a few rare cases for life. And then number 3, no contact with dead bodies. That's something that would make a person ceremonially unclean. Without going through a ritual, they couldn't participate in tabernacle worship. So why these 3 things? Well, if I had to summarize them, I would describe them like this: sobriety, humility, and purity. The idea of these things, well, sobriety, the idea of, for the duration of the vow, again, normally 30, 60, or 90 days, you would give up some of the normal pleasures of life in order to focus on spiritual things. Humility, well, not being obsessed with oneself and with one's appearance, but just being humble and putting your focus instead on God and on others. And then purity, because contact with the body would keep you from being able to worship, just avoiding those things that would hinder you from worshiping, hinder you from connecting with God. Now, Samson couldn't yet observe these things, but his mother could. And so that's the idea here. And you'll notice in verse 4, when it talks, though, about this vow, as it relates to her, but even beyond that, as it relates to Samson, it says in verse 4, please be careful. There's a way of living our life of faith where we are careful, and there's a way of living it where we are careless. And rather than being careless, we want to be careful. I spoke earlier about the future hopes and dreams that a person might have. And I want to ask you to think in terms of those future hopes and dreams that you have. We could ask ourselves, in light of my future hopes and dreams, does this decision make sense? Does this behavior make sense? Does this habit make sense? Is this something that's on the path to where I want to go, or is this sort of off-roading? Well, the angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife, to Samson's mom. Next, he's going to appear to Manoah, to Samson's dad. Look with me at verses 6 and 7. So the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. And he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. So she thought of the angel of the Lord at this point as a man of God, which normally would refer to someone that was a prophet. But she did say that he looked like the angel of God. We know that he was exactly who he appeared to be. She's still not sure. But she realized that she didn't know very much about this man. She hadn't asked him where he was from. He hadn't introduced himself. He did tell her in verse 7 that she would bear a son and that he was to be a Nazarite. So one thing I love is that she shares her spiritual experience with her husband. And that's what family members should do. They should share their spiritual experience. On this Father's Day, I can't help but think about how we talk about the need for families to have shared spiritual experiences. And certainly attending church together, even online, is a shared spiritual experience. So too is having what we call devotions. A lot of emphasis is placed on the value of couples or families reading the Bible together or praying together, things of that nature. And that's a wonderful thing to do. But I think that sometimes we forget the most practical thing of all, and that is just having these spiritual conversations, just verbally sharing with one another our spiritual experiences. That's the idea in Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 and 7, when it says, these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. In other words, all the time, as you go about your day, as you go about your business, as you go about your life, have spiritual conversations. Share with each other your spiritual experiences. And so picking it up in verse 8, then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came to the woman again as she was sitting in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. Then the woman ran in haste and told her husband and said to him, look, the man who came to me the other day has just now appeared to me. So let's stop right there. Manoah prayed and God listened. That's what God does. What does God do when you pray? He listens. I love that. It's so good to know that about God. Now, just a couple of observations. I'm not sure what she was doing just sitting in the field, right? But at this point, when the angel of the Lord appears to her, she took off running. I don't even know if she said anything to the angel of the Lord. What did the angel of the Lord do while he was waiting? Kind of funny, right? So in verse 11, so Manoah arose and followed his wife. And when he came to the man, he said to him, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he said, "I am." Manoah said, "Now let your words come to pass. What will be the boy's rule of life and his work?" So the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. She may not eat anything that comes from the vine, nor may she drink wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean. All that I commanded her, let her observe." So Manoah asks this two-part question in verse 12, and the angel of the Lord really kind of gives a non-answer in verses 13 and 14. But I want you to notice a couple of phrases. In verse 13, the phrase, "let her be careful." In verse 14, the phrase, "let her observe." And I want to come back to this idea of making decisions based on our future hopes and dreams. You know, not only do we need to consider our future hopes and dreams in making decisions, but we need to consider the future hopes and dreams of other people. You know, Samson's mother needed to consider Samson's future hopes and dreams. So when I'm going about decision making, I've got to think not only about how it affects me, but how it affects other people, and especially how it affects members of my family. And maybe most especially as a dad on Father's Day, I certainly want to be thinking about how it affects my children and how it affects my grandchildren. You know, we want to encourage them and not discourage them. We don't want to oppose them as they pursue God's will for their lives. We don't want to put things in their way. We don't want to draw them into things that we may be doing that not only should we not be doing, but they shouldn't be doing. So we've seen the angel of the Lord appear to Samson's mother. We've seen the angel of the Lord appear to Samson's father. And now the angel of the Lord is to disappear and Samson is to be born. Let's pick it up in verse 15. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "Please let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you." And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. So this dinner service is going to turn into a worship service. It's interesting. The angel of the Lord says you must offer it to the Lord as if he wasn't God. But it reminds me of something that Jesus would later say after his birth in Bethlehem. During his ministry, someone, called him good. And Jesus said, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God." And Jesus' point wasn't that he wasn't God. His point was that if he was as good as that person said he was, then he had to be God. He was trying to lead that person to that conclusion. And I think that's exactly what's happening here with the pre-incarnate Christ in this conversation. And so picking it up in verse 17, then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name, that when your words come to pass, we may honor you?" And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" This is kind of interesting, especially when you take into consideration that in pagan circles, knowing a being's name is thought to have some kind of control over it. But to the Hebrews, a person's name indicated one's character. And so the angel of the Lord gives a somewhat cryptic reply, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" But I can't help but think about that messianic passage in Isaiah 9, verse 6, where it says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." It's looking forward to when Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. And it says, "And the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." And so they're looking forward to Jesus' birth. It talks about him being called Wonderful. Here the angel of the Lord uses that very name. So in verse 19, so Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it upon the rock to the Lord. And he did a wondrous thing while Manoah and his wife looked on. It happened as the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell on their faces to the ground. When the angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and his wife, then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. So he offers a burnt and grain offering, goat and grain. For those of us that are familiar with the story about Jesus, with the historical account of his life found in the New Testament, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, this reminds us of his ascension then. After his crucifixion and his resurrection and a short season spent appearing to the disciples, he ascended into heaven. And this sort of prefigures that. It sort of foreshadows that. But notice it says, then Manoah knew. When? After he'd worshiped. And I just want to make the point that there are things that you only learn while worshiping. Worship is so important. It's so valuable. It's so meaningful. Sometimes we think of worship as being nothing more than the songs we sing on the front end of a service, and it's so much more than that, but it certainly includes that. I think that we need to be reminded that that part of our online service, and when we begin meeting in person this fall, that part of our in-person services is just as important as any other part of our service. Because again, there are things you only learn while worshiping. But worship doesn't just happen when we're at church. Worship is a part of our life. I mean, even if you're thinking about songs, having a song in your heart, worshiping God with a song, with a melody, that is something that you can do on your own at any time you want. You can do it when you're stuck in traffic. You can do it when you're getting ready in the morning. You can do it when you're getting ready for bed at night. You can have that worshipful heart. But there's something about connecting with God in a worshipful way that will help you to see things that you might not otherwise see, help you to feel things that you might not otherwise feel. Like something amazing happens when we worship God. And so in verse 22, it says, and Manoah said to his wife, we shall surely die because we have seen God. But his wife said to him, if the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time. So why did Manoah think he was going to die? Well, because he realized that he'd been in the divine presence. But his wife makes a very good point. Like, why would God tell us what he did only to kill us? Like that doesn't even make sense. I had some friends who used to refer to what they called you dummy statements. And that's when you call someone a dummy without actually saying you dummy. But you say something where if you tacked you dummy on at the end, it works perfectly. That's a you dummy statement. Let's see if what Manoah's wife said is a you dummy statement. If the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time. You dummy. It works, right? It's totally a you dummy statement. But she's just using common sense. And so the last two verses in the chapter. So the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahanadan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. So Samson is born. Samson's the judge that we're looking at this week and for the next couple of weeks. And this week we got no further than his birth. When I picture Samson as an infant and as a toddler and as a young boy, I picture Bam Bam from the Flintstones. Just thought I'd throw that out there so that you can share that image with me. So listen, as you think about your life and you think about the lessons that we learn from this installment in the Heroes series, we don't want to accept the status quo in our lives. You know, if you've been in a bad place for a long time, you don't have to stay there. And it could be that some of us right now are tempted to run from our problems like the Danites were. And as I said, there are times that we should get away from something or someone and we don't. But there are many other times when we shouldn't and we try to. And maybe for you, this is going to be one of those defining moments in your life where the right thing for you perhaps to do is to stay and to fight for what you believe in. Don't forget that what you are is not what you shall be. That God is making you something more than you are now. You know, that you're a work in progress, that God isn't finished with you yet. I'm telling you now, you are this, but you shall be that. And I want to remind you to think as you make decisions, as you make plans, as you live your life and navigate everything that's going on right now, to always bear in mind your future hopes and dreams, and do the things that you're doing, the choices that you're making, the path that you've chosen. Do these things make sense in light of your future hopes and dreams? And are you a worshiper? There are things that you're only going to learn in worship. Are you making space? Are you creating space in your life to worship? Let me pray for you now. Father, I just thank you for everyone who's joined us for Church Online today. And I pray that we could take these lessons to heart. I pray, Lord, that each one of us could take away one or two or three things that we could really reflect on and ponder and apply to our lives this week. I pray that you'll bless everyone. I pray that everyone will go forward with just a heart filled with hope about what they're going to be, about what their life is going to become, about all the reasons that we have to be filled with faith going forward. It's in the name of your Son, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.
And now it's time to fill out a connection card.
Yeah, you should see a link in the chat feed. You can always go to our website, solachurch.life, and click contact. That's where the connection card lives. But, this is where you can let us know that you chose to step in and attend Sola Church Online today. But also where you can let us know if you want to step out and participate in one of our virtual small groups, or step up and join the launch team.
And Alan, I love our small groups.
Me too.
Aren't they just the best?
Yeah, they really are.
Every Tuesday night, for those of you who don't know, we get together on a Zoom small group and talk about the weekend sermon and its application in our lives. And it has been such a great time of getting to know each other.
Really meaningful, yeah. And in case you're wondering what the launch team is, launch team members are people who not only plan to attend Sola Church when we launch in person in the fall, but they want to be part of the team. They want to have a role. So God's putting together just the most amazing team as we launch this church, and I'm so excited to see, who else He's going to draw as that team fills out.
Yeah, so awesome to think about.
Yeah.
And we hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks for being here, and happy Father's Day.
Bye, everybody. Happy Father's Day.